Hi, how you doing, and welcome back to another video on the channel. What we have for you today is our video where we take a look at the three most transferred in FPL players this game week and the three most transferred out FPL players, and we just talk about what we would do, whether we would buy them, whether we would sell them on a free transfer, or if we're using a wild card, and hopefully it helps you out with your transfer decisions as well. If you are new to the channel, please do like and subscribe. We've had a few new subscribers since the last video, which is awesome, so hopefully we can keep it going, and a massive thanks to everyone who's supported the channel so far. So the first player we're going to look at today is Gvardiol from Man City, and he's the most transferred in player in FPL this game week. About 220,000 managers have brought him in so far, and it's a bit knee-jerk for me, to be honest, because I actually own him in my team, but I'm considering selling him, not immediately because I've got Southampton at home, and he's not someone that I'd use a free transfer on to sell, but I think if I was wildcarding, defenders just aren't keeping clean sheets at the moment. He's got one clean sheet in 8 games so far this season. And it's a bit like Gabriel a couple of weeks ago. He's got 2 goals in his last 3 games. But if he hadn't scored those goals, defenders are really getting them in for clean sheets. And I think I would sell him to Rico Lewis. And I know you might be thinking, well, Gvardiol's minutes are a bit more consistent. But with Rodri out all season, I think Lewis does have the same consistency, and Lewis has actually got 2 attacking returns himself. They just happen to be assists. So if your defenders aren't getting clean sheets, I would much rather opt for the cheaper options and then use that money to reinvest elsewhere, because it is a season of how many premiums can you get in. And I think whilst it might seem a bit risky, the difference in points between Gvardiol and Lewis, even if Lewis doesn't play, Gvardiol mostly has got 1 or 2 points this season. So you're only really typically looking at a 1 or 2 points difference. So I think I wouldn't be buying him in. I kind of get why people are for Southampton at home, but like we said with Gabriel a few weeks ago, how many goals are you really expecting him to score this season? He's got 2 so far. I think 6 would be a good return for him across the course of the season, and those fixtures don't look ideal. So Man City aren't going to be keeping clean sheets against probably Spurs, Liverpool, I might even say Brighton, Man United, Villa. So in those games, if he's not keeping clean sheets, what are you actually expecting from him? In which case, go for a cheaper option. So the next player, the second most transferred in player this game week, is Bryan Mbeumo once again. And I think you're running out of time to get Mbeumo in, really. You look at those fixtures, and from game week 14 onwards, they're not ideal. I think if you brought him in now, it's not too late. Ipswich at home is obviously a fantastic fixture. Fulham away, you could totally see him scoring against them as well. And same with Bournemouth, Everton, Leicester. If he got 5 in 5, I wouldn't be surprised. But at the same time, he hasn't scored as consistently in the last couple of game weeks. And no assists still. So that is a little bit of a concern from an attacking point of view, that if he's not scoring a goal, he's not really providing much of an attacking threat. And Brentford also haven't kept a clean sheet this season, which might not seem a big deal for a midfielder, but you are missing out on an extra point each game week. So that does take it away from him a little bit. He's still a fantastic option, and I am surprised that only about 30% of people own him. So if you are going to get him in, I'd get him in this week. Otherwise, I'd maybe think of not getting him in. If you haven't got him in so far, there's probably a reason for that. So I wouldn't necessarily change your plan of strategy just to force him in your team, especially for a points hit. I don't think that's worth it, but he is still a great FPL option. So the next player everyone's getting in, or at least 170,000 managers are, is Heung-min Son. And he's got 3 goals, 2 assists, and a clean sheet so far this season. Just 1 clean sheet for Spurs. And it's really because of the fixtures coming up. But for me, I think the fixtures are quite mixed. Spurs do have a massive expected goals contribution. I think it's the best in the whole league, so they are scoring goals. But as we saw in the last game week against West Ham, they're kind of spreading them around a bit. It's not like Son is the focal point and he's getting all the goals. I don't think Solanke got an attacking return in the last game week, and Spurs scored 4 goals. So they are being spread around a bit. I've had Spurs players before, and I find it so frustrating. I'm not going anywhere near them this season. I just think when you get them in, if you had a player in the last game week and they scored 4, Spurs scored 4, and your player didn't get an attacking return, I don't think Brennan Johnson got an attacking return either. and him and Solanke were probably the most transferred in. And you'd just be really frustrated, and that is just Spurs in a nutshell in FPL. At 9.9 million, I can see why people are sort of going from Saka to Son. I do think that's a little bit knee-jerky, and I would just stay away from Spurs, really. I know that Ipswich and Palace games coming up in the next three look pretty good, but I just don't see why you would go for Son over one of the other premiums, given that the prices are pretty similar if you could afford someone like Palmer as well. So the first player we're talking about in the most sold category is William Saliba, sold by nearly 400,000 managers this game week already, and I get it. I think he's got Liverpool next, but he's suspended for that, and then afterwards it's Newcastle and Chelsea, but I would just think about how many points would you have expected him to get against Liverpool anyway? Would you have thought he'd be keeping a clean sheet? There's obviously a possibility, but there's also a possibility he'd have got 1 or 2 points against Liverpool. So the fact that he's suspended just for that game, you're not really losing a lot of point difference. It's not like he was suspended for, Ipswich or Southampton at home, say, and you're thinking, oh, he could have, got a clean sheet and maybe a couple of bonus points in that game if Arsenal had defended well. So I'd be tempted if I owned him to just keep him on the bench for a game week. I think Newcastle and Chelsea, it's not impossible that Arsenal keep clean sheets in those games, even though they're away. And then after game week 11, game week 12, they've got a pretty nice run of fixtures where it's not necessarily, I would say, oh, you should buy Saliba in, because I think he's not really got the same goal threat as Gabriel. So it's not necessarily a buy, but there's a difference between wanting to buy someone and not selling them. So if I owned him, it's a bit like Vardiol. I wouldn't necessarily buy him, but I own him and I'm not desperate to sell him. So I think if you do own him, I'd be absolutely fine keeping him. If you can go to a cheaper defender, a bit like we said with Vardiol to Lewis, and then reinvest that money elsewhere and it's going to help you buy a premium, I think that's fine. But I wouldn't just sell him for selling him's sake, because the fixtures in a few game weeks are really good for Arsenal. So the next player is another Arsenal player, and it's Bukayo Saka. And he was actually on the most transferred in list last game week. Now he's on the most sold list, really because he's injured and we don't quite know what's going to go on. He wasn't in the squad again for the Champions League game, and it's a hamstring injury. I actually transferred him out of my team for Phil Foden, if you've seen that video from last game week that we posted. And the reason for that was, from my experience in FPL, if a player's got a hamstring injury, it just takes them a bit longer to come back from it. You can't do those fast sprints, you can't do that sort of burst of speed, change of pace quickly, and it's not something that you can just play if it's 50-50. It needs to be fully better. So the fact that it's a hamstring injury, I think, does count against him a bit more. If I owned him still, I would still sell him. I think the fixtures also don't look good, and Arsenal just, they're just missing players at the moment. Few players have some injuries, few players are suspended here and there, and I think in the short term there are better options. So I think from that Saka to Son, if you're looking for a short-term move, probably does make sense, even though we sort of said stay away from Spurs. I still stand by that, but I think if you didn't have my Spurs bias, I think that does make sense for a move. I would be aware of a way of getting him back in again, because I think when Arsenal do get their players back, like we said with Saliba, that run of fixtures is awesome, and you probably do want Saka in for that, because he has got 2 goals and 7 assists in 7 game weeks so far. He didn't play last game week. He's got 9 returns in 7 game weeks, plus 3 clean sheets. That's a really good return and output for a premium player. So if he can come back and keep up that consistency, I think he's a keep, but I would sell him for the short term anyway. So the last player on this list is Luis Diaz, and he has been on our most transferred in list for weeks and weeks and weeks. And in the last couple of game week, he's been most sold. He's actually dropped down back to 7.9 million, still owned by about a third of FPL managers, which is really quite a lot of managers still in FPL terms. 5 goals and 1 assist and 5 clean sheets so far this season. 5 clean sheets makes you think maybe we should be transferring in some Liverpool defenders with their fixtures coming up against teams like Southampton, Everton, Newcastle, maybe even Brighton, Villa at home. I think they're good fixtures. I understand why people will be selling Luis Diaz. again, it depends who you're getting in. I think I wouldn't just knee-jerk these players out. I would have a strategy, a plan, and it's not just about saying, oh, I'm going to transfer out this player and bring in this player because I like this player. It's about your next few moves after that as well. So A, what you're going to do with the money. B, how does it impact the rest of your team? And C, could you use that transfer elsewhere in your team? A lot of the times you want your transfers to be used for your big premium players because they're the ones who are going to score the biggest difference in points. A bit like what we were saying, with these cheap defenders in another video. I wouldn't necessarily transfer out a cheap defender for another cheap defender because the point spread is a lot smaller. So Luis Diaz still has that possibility to explode in points. That's not gone away. But the fact that his minutes are a little bit reduced does limit the time he can actually have that explosiveness. I would be tempted to possibly hold him. I think he'll start against Arsenal, and Arsenal with Saliba missing, you don't quite know how it's going to go. And then the immediate fixtures after that aren't awful. So I think, have a look at your team. Is there anything else you could do to it? If you're really stuck and you've got a few transfers and you can, say, make 3 transfers and really sort of rejuvenate your team a bit in the attacking areas, I think you could sell Luis Diaz. But it wouldn't be someone who I'm desperate to get rid of. It'd be someone who I'd sell if I was desperate to get someone else in, if that makes sense. So that's the video. Hopefully it helped you out. Just a bit of my thoughts as well. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comments. If you've got any players that you're thinking of getting in or players that you're thinking of getting out, transfer moves in general, let me know. Please do like and subscribe. Hopefully you have had a good game week. Hopefully you're all settled in your team for this next game week, and I will see you in the next one.